Old Richard Nixon just got elected president. What's his problem? What difficulty is he facing?
We don't know yet.
He's got a Democratic Congress. So anytime that the president has the opposite party in control of Congress, it becomes a problem. So he's going to find some difficulty early in his administration. Okay, and I'm going to give you 2 examples of problems he had with Congress that kind of set the stage that he knew, uh-oh, this might be an interesting ride. And the first one, kind of ironically, had to do with the vacancy on the Supreme Court. Do we have a vacancy on the Supreme Court right now? I think I told you guys, who controls Congress right now? So President Obama, he might have some struggles, because what happens is the president nominates someone, and then the Senate approves it. So concerning this vacancy in the Supreme Court for Nixon, he's going to have to decide. It's the president's responsibility to screen and nominate a person for the position. It's kind of like hiring teachers. It's the high school administration's job to screen and nominate a person for a teaching position. Then that person goes to central office, and central office approves that person, then it goes to the board. How's it going?
The juniors taking their math NWA thing, all freaking out because they got some sort of quiz with you 5th
They
hour.
have a major test.
They don't know if they're going to be done
Yeah,
with
they
this.
got to be done. You tell Ms. Bildo they got to be done. They got to be. That's what she did yesterday for me. Quiz for. Tell them they can go. I think they can go 6th period.
All right.
I'm trying to get somewhere. Okay, but anyway, we got a vacancy on the Supreme Court, and it's just like when a teacher's recommended to be hired, the school board okays that. It's the same thing here. When the president nominates a person for a position in the Supreme Court, the Senate has to approve it. Now, normally, if everything's going right in an administration, the president picks a person, the Senate nominates him, and we're on to go. The problem with Nixon is because the Democratic Congress, he nominated 2 different people that both were denied by the Senate. That doesn't happen very often. So he went out of his way to screen, pick, and nominate 2 different Supreme Court justices, and both were denied by the Senate. It took him 3 times. His 3rd choice, Harry Blackmun, was finally approved by the Senate. And was it, do you think it's a matter that they were that concerned about, were these people not qualified? I'm sure Nixon did his homework and had quality people. So historians will say that sometimes that was just a point made that, we're going to tell you what to do, you're not going to tell us what to do. So that was very unusual to pick 3 different people and have the 3rd choice approved. So there's one example of difficult times for President Nixon. Okay, the second example had to do with federal spending. Federal spending. Now, when Nixon took over the presidency, he wanted to cut federal spending. He thought it was excessive. So what does that mean? I mean, in essence, it's kind of like a married couple. Okay? My wife thinks I have an excess of fee-based spending. Okay?
She's not wrong.
No. And so she considers it excessive. Okay? And her goal is to make sure I don't spend too much money. The president was concerned about the amount of money the federal government was spending. He thought some was excessive. He really didn't like federal programs that were either being poorly administrated or not needed. Okay? And so he went to Congress and he initiated these cuts that he wanted to have in the federal budget. We really think this program, it's not doing much. Okay, we're spending $65 million a year to make people feel good about the cars they're buying, because we're working on consumer things and that type of thing. Well, Congress didn't work with him on those cuts either. They said his cuts weren't justified. They didn't support any of his legislation to cut the federal deficit and spending. And so when Congress requested cuts in the military budget, what do you think Nixon said? Because he had control of that. No. So they really weren't working together very well on federal spending. Again, Nixon wanted to cut some excessive programs that he didn't think were working, were spending money for nothing. And Congress simply wouldn't work with him on that, and so when Congress requested him to make cuts in the military, what did he do? He refused. So he's not having a very good time with Congress. But what's a big issue that he inherited that he needs to take care of, maybe get away from this pettiness with Congress? What's that? Vietnam War. So that takes us to our next subtopic, which is Nixon's plan for Vietnam. Now remember, I told you he had a plan and he was going to bring an honorable end to the Vietnam War, but he wouldn't say how he was going to do it during the election because he thought it might throw off the delicate peace talks that were taking place at the time. And this is a major headache that Nixon inherits from the Johnson administration. Okay? Now you had interior and exterior problems with the Vietnam War. Interior and exterior problems with the Vietnam War. What were his exterior problems? The war itself that was fought in Vietnam. What were his interior problems concerning the Vietnam War at this time that he inherited from Johnson? Hey, LBJ. How many kids did you kill today? The protests were just getting out of hand. So when he inherits the Vietnam War, he not only inherits the war away from the United States, so to speak, he also inherits this continued protest. And this protest is tearing Americans apart because there are Americans that are very patriotic, that think that we're doing the right thing in Vietnam, and then there's a lot of Americans, especially the younger generation, who do not believe that we should be in Vietnam. So finally, in the summer of 1969, he made public his two-part plan for Vietnam. Okay, finally, in the summer of 1969, Nixon made his two-part plan in Vietnam public for the American people to chew on. Now, the two-part plan was as follows. The first part of his plan was the gradual withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. The gradual withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. The gradual withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. Now, what does that say to you? I mean, what are they doing? Poland, how many are in there? Do we have, kind of remember how many about were in there about this time? What's that? Go ahead, Amy. Yeah, I think you said it. Anybody remember how many were in there? Oh, almost, yeah. Well over 500,000. And they were going to gradually withdraw them and bring those home, so many at a time. Okay? Second thing that he stated in his plan, that the Americans would only fight the enemy on the defensive. They would only engage or fight the enemy on the defensive, which means we're going to be doing what? Defending ourselves, not taking the offensive. No longer are we going to be trying to be aggressive in the war. We're only going to engage the enemy on the defensive. Now, there were two goals that Nixon had that he thought would be accomplished by this plan. Again, the plan of gradually withdrawing troops from Vietnam, along with the American people knowing that we're only going to fight on the defensive. What would be the two goals accomplished by that? What would be the two goals for his plan? What are we going to accomplish by that plan? Yeah, absolutely. He hoped it would not maybe stop, but he hoped it would quiet some of this protesting that was going all around the country. Thank you, Taylor. That's right. He was hoping his plan for Vietnam would result in the quieting of the protesting. What's the most important thing it would do if we're gradually withdrawing and fighting only on the defensive?
End the war.
What's that?
End the war.
Well, kind of, but what are we doing? That's right. Save American lives. Yeah, does this strategy kind of tell you that we've kind of give up on winning the war? No question. That's how a lot of American people took it. Okay? So the plan that he comes up with, number one, is going to hopefully quiet some of the protesting that was happening across the country. And the biggest thing is that it was going to save American lives. Well, just about when he was doing something that was going to make sense, he made a blunder. And that's our next subtopic, which is President Nixon's decision to advance into Cambodia. President Nixon's decision to advance into Cambodia. Anybody know what Cambodia is? Small country. Where do you think it borders? Where's it border? If it's a mistake, which part of Vietnam? North Vietnam. So in April of 1970, hey, we've left the 60s. In April of 1970, President Nixon sent 31,000 American troops into Cambodia. And Cambodia was a country that bordered North Vietnam. Okay, in April of 1970, President Nixon sent 31,000 American troops into Cambodia. And Cambodia was a country that bordered North Vietnam. Now, why do you think he would go into Cambodia? Now, I don't know if you can pick this up, but I want you to think, why would he go into Cambodia? What would Cambodia have to do with the Vietnam War? They're not assisting them by supplying troops. They're not involved in the war. But why do you think he went into Cambodia? What do you think the North Vietnamese were doing in Cambodia that would have him send 31,000 troops in? They were doing what?
Setting stuff up there for like the war.
What were they they were setting stuff up. What were they setting up? What were they storing there? Their military supplies and weapons. So the purpose that Nixon sent troops into Cambodia was to clear out these military supply centers that North Vietnam had set up in the country. So they were basically trying to protect their stockpile of weaponry by putting it in Cambodia because it was easily accessible from North Vietnam. How do you think people in America that were really for the Vietnam War took that move? What'd they see it as?
Furthering the war.
It escalated the war into Cambodia, and it led to tremendous protests all across the United States, most notably on college campuses. So this invasion into Cambodia led to tremendous protests across the United States, and especially on college campuses. And the college campus that got the most publicity, which was negative publicity, during these protests after Cambodia was Kent State University in Ohio. Kent State University in Ohio.
So they really can go to put weapons there or to remove what?
To destroy the weapons that the North Vietnamese had put in supply centers there. I mean, it wasn't a horrible move, but it did lead to tremendous protest across the United States, especially on college campuses, and one most notable was at Kent State. Well, this is what occurred on May 4th of 1970. We'll read it here. John Philo. While I was a student at Kent State, I worked as a lab technician at the School of Journalism. That Monday morning, I opened up the lab about 8 a.m. This was after a nasty weekend, not just at Kent State, but all over the country. Most colleges and universities were erupting after Nixon's announcement of the Cambodia invasion. The National Guard had been called up on Saturday after the ROTC building was burned. At noon, we closed the lab to go down to the rally, right outside the journalism building, Taylor Hall. When I got there, the guard and the students had confronted each other across the commons, about 200 yards apart. Suddenly, there was a series of tear gas barrages, and I was running back and forth between the two groups taking pictures of the conflict. The guardsmen, that'd be the National Guardsmen, lined up with fixed bayonets and made a sweep across the commons towards Taylor Hall. They didn't bother me, although I didn't give them a chance to get within striking distance of a nightstick. By following them, I ended up in the parking lot behind Taylor Hall. There were about 75 guardsmen, helmeted and wearing black gas masks. They looked grotesque. After about 5 minutes, the guard started moving to the top of the hill. As they were moving back, the students followed them, keeping a distance of about 150 feet. The hostile body of the crowd was shouting and throwing rocks at the guard. I was jogging to get in position behind this group and the guardsmen in the background so I could show the relationship of the two and also to be close should anything happen. The guard was moving backward, dodging rocks. As they reached the crest of the hill, they turned suddenly, dropped to one knee and began firing directly into the crowd. People started running in all directions. When the firing started, the people came roaring back down the sidewalk. It was a 2-foot drop from there down to the street, and if you're running and don't expect it, you could break a leg. So I was yelling at these groups. This is just a scare tactic. I could see no reason for these rifles to be pointing into the crowd and firing away unless they were using blanks. I was screaming, "Don't run, you're going to break your leg." I couldn't imagine live ammunition. I was standing up, dodging back and forth, grabbing these people as they ran by me. The firing was still going on. It seemed like an awfully long time. I raised the camera to my eye, got it focused on the guardsman shooting right at me. My finger is on the button, the shutter on its way down, and at that moment I see over the right side of the viewfinder a bullet slam into a metal sculpture, going right through it and blasting a hole in a tree. The whole sculpture shook and a cloud of rust settled around it. I just dropped my camera and said, "My God, someone is firing real bullets. I thought someone had made a mistake." Then the firing stopped. There were people laying all over the grass. I'm the only one standing up on the sidewalk. There was an officer out front of the guardsmen with his hands up to tell them to stop shooting. As I turned around, directly over my left shoulder, I saw the body of Jeff Miller. He had been shot in the neck. It could have only been a few seconds, but already the blood was extensive, like kicking over a bucket of blood. With the realization that they were firing live ammunition, I said, "This is crazy, I've got to get out of here." And I started walking away. I think I took 3 steps and said, "Wait a minute, someone's got to document this." I turned back around. Wounded and dying people are laying all around me. Other people are pulling themselves up off the ground. No one is going near the body. And then this girl, Marianne Pacheco, comes running up the street, and she kneels down beside the body. I started walking toward her. Her body was shaking. She was crying, and then she screamed, a god-awful scream. My reflexes took over, and that was it, one frame. After it was all over and the university was closed, I took it upon myself to get the pictures out. The biggest thing with me was that I didn't think people would believe what had happened. It seemed so unreal. You have to understand that. At this time, I was very paranoid about what was going to happen. I didn't know if someone was going to stop me and take my film away. I was trying to get this film into my pocket, and I was thinking about hiding it in my Volkswagen until I got to Pennsylvania. I really thought someone had blundered in killing these people, and there was going to be a mass cover-up. Already the radio reports were saying that 2 guardsmen and only 2 students were killed. Everyone was shocked at the false reports. They weren't telling what really happened. As I was driving to Pennsylvania, I began to wonder if I really had the photographs or not. I said to myself, I think I remember seeing it happen, and I think I remember photographing it, but I'm not sure. Because I was so frightened, I can remember the camera to my eye, but I was trying to remember whether the shutter was going off. It was such an intense thing. I was lucky. There were people killed on both sides of me. I don't know how I escaped without being hit. It's something I'll always be thankful for. The girl in the photo, Marianne Pacheco, was not a student at Kent State. She turns out to be a 14-year-old runaway from Florida, just drifting through campus on this day. Jeff Miller wasn't a radical or a leader. In fact, he was not politically active. He liked playing drums, wore his hair long, was shy of girls, and was concerned about social problems. He felt angered and betrayed by the Cambodian invasion. The students told that Kent State stands at 4 dead and 5 badly wounded. Among the guardsmen, 1 man was injured on the arm by a rock. Can you imagine that happening on a college campus? This turned out to be a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph right here, and that's why you're getting a chance to see it. So, this was a bad thing. Nixon took so much heat after this incident at Kent State, he did 2 things. How are we doing on time? He pushed, listen to this, he did 2 things. He pushed to repeal the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and they did. The Senate voted to repeal the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And in late June of 1970, he ended the military presence in Cambodia. So after the events at Kent State University, the Senate voted to repeal the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and in late June 1970, President Nixon ended the military presence in Cambodia.
When did he do that?
He did that in June of 1970. So Nixon's not having a lot of his success in Vietnam. Our next subtopic is a real interesting story about Vietnam and how innocent civilians were affected. It's called Kim's story. Kim's story. Look at this picture up here, kids. Have you ever seen this picture right here? You ever seen that picture? That's a picture of kids running as fast as they can in Vietnam. One girl completely naked, had to run. I'm going to tell you Kim's story. I'm going to tell you about that little naked girl there. Unbelievable story. Well, on June 8th of 1972, a tiny village in South Vietnam called Trang Bang was occupied by North Vietnamese forces. On June 8th of 1972, a tiny village in South Vietnam called Trang Bang was occupied by North Vietnamese forces. Does it surprise you that the North Vietnamese were taking over parts of South Vietnam? No, because what is our strategy in the Vietnam War now? Fight only on the defensive. Well, who's still fighting on the offensive? Which army? The South Vietnamese army. So, in Trang Bang, the South Vietnamese Army's 25th Division was called in to try to get things under control in that tiny village. So on June 8, 1972, a tiny village in South Vietnam called Trang Bang was being occupied by North Vietnamese forces, and as a result of that, the South Vietnamese's 25th Division was called in. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on June 8, 1972, the South Vietnamese Army, to try to clear the North Vietnamese out, dropped actually 4 drums of napalm